Okay, so are we ready for this?
Always ready for a deep dive.
Let's do it. We're diving into the full history of Paris this time. All of it, from the very beginning to the city we know and love today.
Sounds ambitious. We're up for it.
Of course we are. That's why we're here. Okay, Paris. Where do we even begin with a history that big?
Well, like always, we've got to start at the beginning.
Perfect. Let's do it. I got this Wikipedia article you sent over with some notes and highlights. History of Paris. So, what are we talking? 8,000 BC. What did Paris even look like back then?
8,000 BC, you're looking at a very different Paris. Imagine, instead of the Eiffel Tower, you've got hunter-gatherer camps.
Really? Wow. So who are these early Parisians?
Oh, they were called the Parisi, and they actually weren't doing too bad for themselves. They had already established trade routes.
Get out of here.
No, seriously. And get this, they even had their own currency, gold coins. This was way before the Romans came knocking.
Gold coins. Okay, that's pretty impressive. So they were doing well for themselves until cue the Roman music.
Exactly. 52 BC, Julius Caesar waltzes in and decides he wants a piece of the action. This clash. That's the Battle of Lutetia, a turning point for Paris.
And just like that, Parisi's out and Lutetia is in, right? So what changes under Roman rule? Besides the name, obviously.
Oh, tons of stuff. This is where we see the seeds of the Paris we know today being planted. Roman architecture, urban planning. I mean, have you seen the Thermes de Cluny?
Wait, the Roman baths, those are from that time?
Yep. Luxurious baths, heated homes, amphitheaters. The Romans really knew how to make a city.
It's amazing how they left their mark everywhere they went. But okay, so we've got Roman influence. But how does Lutetia become Parisius?
It's subtle, but it speaks volumes about the city spirit. Even under Roman rule, Paris kept its own unique flavor.
I like that. Holding on to those roots. And then, of course, you can't talk about early Paris without mentioning the OG Parisian hero, Saint Genevieve.
Ah, yes, facing down Attila the Hun in the 5th century. Talk about a power move.
Seriously.
Right.
She saves the city. She practically is Paris. So what happens when the Roman Empire goes kaput? Does Paris just fall apart?
Well, there's definitely some chaos. But then comes Clovis I, the king of the Franks. He really sets the stage for Paris to become a major player.
What did he do? What was so special about Clovis?
Well, aside from being a really good strategist, Clovis had a stroke of genius. He converted to Christianity.
Oh, interesting. And that was a big deal because
Huge. Christianity was the dominant religion, so this move aligned the monarchy with the church. And that's a powerful combination. You could even say that single choice changed the destiny of Paris.
wow, talk about a long-term strategy.
Right. And from there, it's off to the races. Paris becomes a major political and religious center. You start to see those grand cathedrals, the monarchy consolidating its power.
Don't forget the intellectuals. The University of Paris, one of the world's first universities.
Absolutely. It's mind-blowing when you think about it. This little island in the Seine, the Ile de la Cité, becomes this hub of power, religion, and knowledge.
The Ile de la Cité, home to Notre Dame Cathedral. I mean, talk about an iconic landmark.
Construction began in 1163. Can you imagine the ambition?
It's breathtaking, that cathedral. But even with all that ambition, all that progress,
Yeah.
then comes the 14th century.
The Black Death. Yeah.
A devastating plague, the 100 Years' War. It feels like a 1-2 punch. How did Paris survive?
Well, it wasn't easy. Imagine a city already grappling with a pandemic that wipes out a huge chunk of the population. Then on top of that, you've got the English constantly threatening. It was a difficult time to be a Parisian, to say the least.
It sounds absolutely brutal. Speaking of brutal, this 100 Years' War, was it really 100 years of nonstop fighting?
Not exactly nonstop, but it was a long, drawn-out conflict.
Yeah.
From 1337 to 1453, imagine the toll that took on the city. And at one point, the English even occupied Paris.
Wow, they occupied Paris. I bet the Parisians were thrilled about that. So how did they get rid of the English?
Well, that's where our next fascinating figure comes in, Joan of Arc.
Oh, yes. Joan of Arc, what a legend.
She was something else. Driven by her faith, this young woman rallies the French troops. She helps break the siege of Orleans, which was a major turning point in the war.
It's like something out of a movie. Tragic ending, though.
It is a tragic story, burned at the stake for heresy, but later becoming a symbol of French resilience. You know, in a way, her story really sums up this period in Paris's history: struggle, courage, and ultimately the will to survive.
And survive they did. But just as things seem to be looking up, Paris gets hit with another wave of turmoil, right?
Unfortunately, yes. Just as the 100 Years' War is winding down, the French wars of religion erupt. This time, it's Catholics against Protestants.
And this is when the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre happens in Paris, right?
Yes, 1572.
Ugh, that's just horrifying.
It was a dark chapter, no doubt, a planned massacre of Protestants right in the heart of the city. A horrific reminder that even during the Renaissance, with all its focus on humanism, religious intolerance was still a powerful force.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine something like that happening today. But as you said, this is also the Renaissance. So in the midst of all this, you've got someone like King Francis I, a patron of the arts, transforming the Louvre into this grand palace. It's like two completely different worlds colliding.
It really is. And Francis I, he's a fascinating figure, isn't he? Inviting artists like Leonardo da Vinci to his court. You can really see his embrace of the Renaissance spirit reflected in the Louvre itself.
Oh, absolutely. It goes from being this medieval fortress to a showcase for art and culture. It's like Paris was trying to outdo itself.
I see what you mean. It's like they were saying, yeah, things are tough, but look at this amazing art.
Exactly. So the Louvre is expanding, the printing press is changing everything. Paris is becoming this hub for creativity and intellectual exchange.
Oh, absolutely. The printing press was huge. Suddenly, information is spreading faster than ever before.
Yeah.
And Paris, with all its scholars and printers, it becomes like the center of this information explosion.
Like the Silicon Valley of its day.
Exactly. But let's not forget, while all this is happening, life for the average Parisian is still pretty rough.
Yeah, no smartphones, no internet.
Not even proper sanitation in many parts of the city. We're talking muddy streets, the constant threat of disease.
Not exactly the romantic image of Paris we have today.
Not quite, but even then you see this resilience. The Pont Notre Dame, for example, built in the early 16th century. Yeah. It was a marvel of engineering for its time, but also it was lined with houses and shops. It shows how Parisians were determined to keep life going, even in the face of challenges.
They always find a way, don't they? So as we move toward the end of the 16th century, there's a new king on the scene, right? Henry IV.
Henry IV. He was a king who knew how to make an entrance. After decades of religious wars, he manages to bring peace and stability back to Paris. It's a period historians often call the Bourbon Renaissance.
The Bourbon Renaissance. Yeah. Sounds fancy. What was so great about it?
Well, for starters, Henry IV was all about rebuilding Paris, making it even more beautiful than before. He completes the Pont Neuf, which was a pretty big deal.
Why was so special about this bridge?
Well, for one, it was the first bridge in Paris built without houses on it.
Wait, really? No houses crowding the bridge?
Nope. Henry IV, he understood that public spaces played a huge role in shaping the city's identity. The Pont Neuf wasn't just a bridge, it was a place to walk, to enjoy the view, to see and be seen.
So he was going for a more open, spacious feel.
Exactly. And it wasn't just the bridge. He also created the Place des Vosges, which was originally called the Place Royale.
Oh, the Place des Vosges. That's one of my favorite spots in Paris.
It's beautiful, isn't it? Those symmetrical facades, the elegant arches. Henry IV really set the standard for Parisian squares.
So this idea of these grand open squares, we can thank Henry IV for that.
You got it. He revitalized the economy, promoted religious tolerance, really set the stage for Paris to blossom into this major European capital.
He sounds like he was pretty good at his job.
He knew what he was doing. But even with all that progress, there were still challenges. Poverty was a big issue, and there were still tensions simmering beneath the surface.
It's like that saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Sadly, yeah. But hey, this was also the era of Molière.
The playwright. So theater was big in Paris at this time.
Oh, huge. Imagine attending a performance at the Hôtel de Bourgogne, one of the first permanent theaters in Paris.
Sounds like a fun night out.
It was. And this is also when we see the first cafes popping up in Paris. The Café Procope, which opened in 1686, became a hub for intellectuals, artists, writers.
I can picture it now. All those lively discussions, fueled by coffee.
Exactly. It was a time of great intellectual and creative ferment. And this energy carried on under Henry V's successor, Louis XIII, who, with his trusty sidekick Cardinal Richelieu, further strengthened the monarchy. They basically laid the groundwork for the reign of Louis XIV, the Sun King himself.
Ah, Louis XIV. Now there's a name everyone knows. What was his impact on Paris? I mean, he's the one who built Versailles, right?
He did.
Yeah.
But his impact on Paris is undeniable. I mean, this was a king who was all about grandeur. He completed the Cour Carrée of the Louvre, transforming it into the sprawling palace we know and love today. He also built the Hôtel des Invalides, which was originally a hospital for soldiers, but is now famous for housing Napoleon's tomb.
Napoleon's tomb. Now that's jumping ahead a bit in our story. But okay, let's stick with Louis XIV for a minute. I've always found it fascinating that he decided to move the entire royal court out of Paris to Versailles. Why do you think he did that?
Well, there are lots of theories. Some say he wanted to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city to create a court that was entirely under his control. Others say he was trying to outdo his rivals to create the most magnificent palace in all of Europe and show off his power.
And what about Paris? How did the city cope without the king in residence?
It was definitely an adjustment, but Parisians are nothing if not adaptable. The city continued to thrive, the arts flourished, new businesses sprung up, and the population kept growing. In a way, you could say that being freed from the constraints of the royal court allowed Paris to develop its own unique character even further.
So even without the king around, Paris found a way to shine.
Exactly. And this set the stage for the 18th century and the dawn of the Enlightenment, which, as you might imagine, had a profound impact on the City of Lights.
So Louis XIV is hanging out in Versailles, leaving Paris to its own devices. What happens to the city?
It's funny how things work out, isn't it? It's like Louis XIV leaving created this space for new ideas to take root.
You're talking about the Enlightenment.
Exactly. The 18th century, this is when Paris becomes the center of reason and progress. All those salons, all those intellectuals debating philosophy and politics.
Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot, big names, big ideas.
Right. And their ideas, they weren't just staying in those salons. They were spreading throughout society, challenging the old ways of thinking.
And ultimately those ideas, they help spark the French Revolution, right?
It's almost like poetic justice, isn't it? All those palaces, all that grandeur Louis XIV created. And then the revolution comes along and shakes everything up.
And Paris is right at the center of it all.
The storming of the Bastille, the monarchy overthrown, Paris was transformed.
It must have been an incredible time to be alive. Dangerous, but exciting. How did the revolution change the actual city itself?
Well, some things were destroyed, obviously, symbols of the old regime torn down. But the revolution also inspired new monuments, the Arc de Triomphe, for example.
Oh, the Arc de Triomphe.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine Paris without it.
I know. And while it was originally commissioned by Napoleon to celebrate his victories, it's become this symbol of Paris's resilience, its ability to overcome challenges.
Speaking of Napoleon, he's kind of a big deal after the revolution. Does he continue its legacy or try to erase it?
Napoleon is tricky. He's a product of the revolution, but he's also this ambitious emperor.
So which side of him wins out?
Well, he definitely understood the power of symbolism. He saw Paris as a stage to showcase his own power and legacy.
Hence all the grand projects.
Exactly. Completing the Arc de Triomphe, starting the Rue de Rivoli, he wanted Paris to rival the grandeur of ancient Rome.
Sounds like he wasn't lacking in confidence.
Not at all. But even after Napoleon's time, Paris kept changing. The 19th century, the Industrial Revolution.
Did Paris embrace this new industrial age?
In its own way, but it also led to some growing pains. The population exploded, which meant more opportunities, but also more poverty, more inequality.
Progress and his discontents.
Yeah, exactly. And this is also the era of Romanticism. Paris, with its bohemian spirit, its grand architecture, its history of revolution and change, it becomes this magnet for artists and writers.
Victor Hugo, Les Misérables.
Exactly. It's like Paris itself became a character in these stories.
And this is when we start to see the Paris we know today, right? The grand boulevards, the wide avenues.
Ah, you're thinking of Haussmann. Georges Eugene Haussmann, the man who, under Napoleon III, would completely reshape Paris.
Haussmann. His name is synonymous with Parisian urban planning, but he's also a controversial figure, isn't he?
Oh, definitely. He was ruthless, demolished entire neighborhoods to make way for his grand boulevards.
I imagine that didn't make him very popular with everyone.
You can say that again. But you can't deny his impact. His vision shaped the Paris we know today. Those wide open streets, the parks, the monuments. It creates this feeling of grandeur, of elegance that we associate with Paris.
So, love him or hate him, Haussmann left his mark on the city. And then, of course, the 20th century arrives. 2 world wars and economic depression. How did Paris weather those storms?
Well, it wasn't easy. Paris during World War II, occupied by the Nazis. That was a dark time.
Those images are still so powerful. The Eiffel Tower with the swastika flying over it.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine.
It was a time of incredible suffering, but also a time of incredible bravery. The French resistance, fighting back against the occupation, it's a testament to the human spirit.
And then liberation in 1944. What a moment that must have been.
Can you imagine? Allied troops marching down the Champs-Élysées, the Arc de Triomphe draped in the French flag.
It gives me chills just thinking about it. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the history of Paris, Where do we leave the city as it enters the late 20th century and into the 21st?
We leave it facing new challenges, of course, but also with the same spirit of resilience, of creativity that has always defined this incredible city.
It's been quite a journey, from those early hunter-gatherer camps to the city of lights we know today.
It really has. And it makes you realize that history isn't just about dates and names. It's about the people who lived through those times, the choices they made, the challenges they overcame.
It's the human story told on a grand scale.
Exactly. And in a way, the story of Paris isn't over yet. It's still being written every single day.
That's a great point. So, for our listeners who are now inspired to learn more about Paris, what advice would you give them?
Go experience it for yourselves. Walk those streets, soak it all in. You can read all you want, but there's nothing like experiencing Paris firsthand.
Perfectly said.
Mm.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the incredible history of Paris. Until next time, keep exploring.
Thank you for listening. If you love history, don't forget to subscribe to History with Bree and Peter. Join us for more fascinating stories from the past. Hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode.